All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I was going to come on here and laugh, and I got to tell you, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I did a bunch of that after the game. That was my initial reaction. I mean, I laughed myself all the way through most of that melee. In fact, I had to go back and watch it again. But I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. And you're probably thinking there's going to be something like really snarky and snotty, and that's not me. That's not the contrarian play. That's what you're anticipating. I'm not going to do that. So, because here's the reality. I mean, I grew up watching Barry Sanders just flip the ball to the ref in the end zone, act like he's been there before, and knows it won't be long before he'll be back again. So that's how I'm going to treat this. That's just what we do. We just humiliate Ohio State. We psychologically break your head coach and your fan base, and it's been fun, great fun, and we'll do it again in 365 days and flip the ball to the ref, and we'll be back in the end zone soon. So we're going to treat it like that. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Gets caught.
Hey, they said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to a victorious edition of Michigan Podcast. I wish I had this quote, but I have to give credit to Anthony Broom over at the Wolverine. This may not have been Michigan's greatest win over Ohio State, but it sure as hell was the funniest. All right, that's very true. That is very true. When I say my son Noah and I just literally broke out laughing at the end of the game down here in the man cave when it was over. Ha! I mean, you had no business losing to that Michigan team. None. There were maybe 5 players that we played on Saturday that would start for Ohio State. Unfortunately, 4 of them were on the second or third most important position group in the sport, the defensive line. And boy, howdy, did that group absolutely dominate. Quarterback hits and pressures, Michigan had 20. Ohio State had 2. 2 the entire game. That was it. And that's just part of the game. Here's what's also part of the game. Michigan has just psychologically broken Ohio State, and especially Ryan Day. The Wolverines have not punted in this game in the fourth quarter since 2019. Since 2019. Michigan had possession of the ball for 13 of the 15 minutes of the fourth quarter on Saturday. Michigan has played the number 2 ranked Ohio State team 5 times in a row, and the last 4 years in a row defeated that team. So for the last 5 times Michigan has played Ohio State has gone into the final weekend of the regular season ranked number 2 in the country. And over that 5 years, it has just 1 Big Ten title and no natties for being number 2 that late in the year. the most expensive roster in college football, will finish 4th in the Big Ten Conference. And what happened afterwards with Ohio State players coming back onto the field? Go watch the video for yourself. They come back onto the field during the flag planting to basically start a melee. And you see Michigan and Ohio State coaches in there trying to break it up. And Ryan Day just standing from afar like a deer in the headlights. I mean, he is blinking as often as somebody tweaking on meth, which is not at all. Just. And then finally looks at one of his players or coaches walking by. What happened? Well, dude, they're macing and pepper spraying the frickin' media. Okay. And you're like, what happened? So are your fans. And it's really them that I want to talk to here, or about anyway, for a minute. I was listening to Full Ride this morning because whenever Michigan has a huge win, I try to listen to every radio show I can, every podcast I have time to get to with my 14 jobs. And I'm listening to Full Ride on the way into the show this morning, and I hear Rick Neuheisel say, you know, Kirby Smart is 1-5 against Alabama, and Georgia fans aren't losing their minds. And yeah, they want him to beat those guys, but you know, he's won so much they can just still go on and enjoy football and have a ton of success. Ohio State needs to learn that. And to that, Rick, I ask, if you spent 5 minutes in the state of Ohio, bro, do you even Ohio State, bro? There is no fan base in America more absolutely obsessed with an opponent than Ohio State is with Michigan. There is not. There is not. And those fans won't let him do that, Rick. They won't let him do that. I mean, they were our 12th man in the game on Saturday. They were our 12th man. They turned on their own team. They booed their own team. They added more nervous energy than we could have contrived or mustered on our own. So, you know, Texas A&M's got that tribute to the 12th man in the stadium. We've got to start doing a tribute to the 12th man when we go to Columbus now. We got to thank the Ohio State fan base. That cultic obsession, that zero-sum, psychosis. Thank you. A tip of the cap. You know, we don't do assists like this in football, but you guys are like Yari Curry feeding it to Gretzky from off the wing, man. Thank you for that. I mean, the amount of nervous energy and tension that you guys are willing to impose on your own team on our behalf. And all this time, we thought you guys hated us. And here you are out there psyching out your own team for us. And then, of course, the way you're going to react in the comments section to everything I just said will only just further to prove my point. So shout out to all you all in the comments I won't be reading for doing exactly that. But no, Rick, it is not possible for an Ohio State fan just to say, well, we're 10-2 and still the betting favorite to win the playoff. It sucks. I hate it. Hate those guys, but let's go play the rest of the year. No. There is no rest of the year. This is the year. This is the game. It's the year every year. And the level of obsession, and that's why you have coaches who are otherwise successful at a high level, like a John Cooper and now a Ryan Day. Once it gets going against them, before Sharon Moore can even shoot that arrow from across the sideline at him again, dude is getting arrow shot in his back from his own fans. So I wanted to make sure here this week on the episode, because there's going to be a lot of great talk and all of it deserved, about Mason Graham. Mason Graham may very well be the greatest defensive tackle Michigan's ever had in program history. And Kenneth Grant was a stud too. Makari Page, that moved to nickel, has reinvigorated his career. He was having a, let's just say, suboptimal year at safety. He's been phenomenal the last few weeks at corner. Meanwhile, Quentin, we looked at Barry, and he didn't look like he could play the nickel at all. He's freaking nails out there at corner. So we found our next great corner, maybe. Khalil Mullings with one of the great runs there in Michigan-Ohio State history to set up that field goal on that 3rd and long. I mean, those guys are going to all get their flowers, going to all get their propers, and all of that is deserved, man, all of it. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't let this episode go by without tipping the cap and putting a tip maybe in the jar for maybe the unsung hero. I mean, Dominic Zavada out there on the road at the shoe banging 55-yard field goals into the swirling winds. Again, those guys all off season, they're going to get their propers. Flowers coming their way, but make sure you do not fail to recognize one of the true MVPs of Michigan's ongoing run of dominance over Ohio State. And that is the Ohio State fan. For all of the psychosis and the drama and the angst they impose on their own team and their own coach, yes, we broke your coach, but we couldn't have done it without you. Well, let's find out what the other side of the scarlet and gray septic tank believes after what just happened last Saturday. Our good friend, who is obviously in mourning, Mark Rogers, is here with us. Not so sure how reasonable of a bucknut he's going to be right now, Mark. But, brother, first of all, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, number one. Number two, what was that? What was that?
Well, Thanksgiving was before Saturday, obviously, and before the game. So, yes, I can check that box. We had a nice Thanksgiving. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you other than I was the guy that was sitting here last week mapping out a formula for a Michigan win. And so even down to the point that we saw the exchange of punts at a crucial time in the game where Michigan was booming 68-yarders and Ohio State was returning 30-yarders back in return. And this was very much played like some of the first games we talked about, you and I, or have read about from the mid-1970s. This is how this game was played. So the field position turned out to be much more important than we ever thought, because how many games have you seen through the years, not just in this series, but in other situations where when one team takes control and they have flipped field position and their special teams units and their punter is good enough to keep, and their defense keep that field position advantage, then you get what Ohio State fans saw against Michigan State in that famous 20-15 meltdown when they lost a shot at the national championship, when there's still like 3 minutes on the clock, but you can see the slow death. You can see it processing as Michigan just churns out yardage down the field. And then once Khalil Mullings broke loose on that one, you know that the game is completely in Michigan's hands and their control, and you can't do a damn thing about it except watch them kick the game-winning field goal from about the same distance that your kicker missed 2 field goals after hitting 14 straight from under 40 yards. That's when you think, okay, is it just not meant to be, or is this team white-knuckling this game all the way down to the place kicker?
I think there are 2 things to do to talk about this game. One is just schematic, but I also think it ties into number 2, psychoanalysis. Okay. And so, you mentioned that 2015 game against Michigan State. Yeah. Okay. So it was a terrible game, horrible conditions. It was sleeting, raining the whole game. And you're sitting there with the best mutter in college football in the backfield. Why don't you just give him the ball 30 times and win the game? Ezekiel Elliott. Why didn't you just do that? Right? And Ezekiel Elliott speaks out during the game week leading into the game against us. And I knew we were doomed when he did that, because then he got the ball every down. And I think he's still running. Okay. So why didn't you just throw it to Jeremiah Smith about 10 times and say, even if all we get out of this is you come down with 1 big play out of 10 and we get 2 or 3 other pass interference penalties, but we flip the field. I didn't understand schematically what Ohio State was attempting to do. They played perfectly into what Wink Martindale and Michigan wanted them to do. In many respects, what Wink did is what Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter did the last few years, which is you guys can have all the yards underneath as you want. We don't believe Ryan Day will be patient enough for 9-play touchdown drives. We don't believe that. And so we'll see in the red zone, and we'll play red zone roulette. And Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter won red zone roulette the last 3 years. Wink Martindale won the red zone roulette. I think it was 3-1 or 4-1. The red zone roulette on Saturday. But I didn't understand either when you had Steve Sarkisian and Dan Lanning at Oregon both showed that you can just kind of go around that Michigan defensive front by attacking them on the edges in space, right? And just really never saw Ohio State do that. And our theory here, Mark, on our end, is that Ryan Day is just gone full Frodo. I'm smart. I can do stuff, except substitute smart for tough. That he is just bound and determined to prove that not that he's just better than us, but tougher than us. And we essentially are goading him in to playing a style of football that is not befitting of what would actually win the game because he's out to prove a point. That's kind of the theory within Michigan circles, trying to explain why Ohio State ran a Jim Tressel-like game plan and nothing like what Oregon and Texas showed you could do to go around our outstanding defensive front. What's your view of that there from the Scarlet and Gray side of things?
Well, I would have told you, whether it was last year after the game or the year before, that while Ohio State's being criticized for being too soft and Ryan Day is countering that with rhetoric, that he's way too smart, that we know that football is a physical game. First and foremost, it's a physical game. But more and more, it's becoming, yes, a physical game, but there's also athleticism and speed and strategy and skill. Those are involved too. And if you can keep the ball away from the muscle of the opponent, then it becomes even more so that game. And that's why you have all the shiny objects on the outside that were recruited so heavily and so highly. I can't explain running the football on 3rd and 8 at your own 15-yard line with, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there, there was like 8 minutes left in the game. There are few.
They did it twice, Mark. They did it twice. And if you go back and look at the drive chart, I think you're going to find he did it both times after Will Howard threw interceptions. All right, so you had poor field position after Will Howard threw picks. And on the next two, in the possessions right after that on 3rd and long, he just gave up the down. Just gave up the down to punt on both of those.
And if you're winning the game and you're trying to play scared and protect a lead, okay, I can understand that. Let's put it in our defense's hands. Our quarterback is shell-shocked. But you need to come back and win the game, or you need to break a tie to win the game. You have an inferior field goal kicker. You can't just cross the 50-yard line and kick a field goal to win the game. And you're not going to trust your quarterback, who's protected the ball well all year, to make a simple throw to get you 8 yards. That's pathetic. Yeah, they ran the ball. I saw some stats about running the ball between the tackles and how ineffective that was. They only had basically 2 runs that loosened up the defense at all. Those were both on the edges. The one was a bit of a trick formation with the bush push setup where they got Quinshon Judkins to the outside. But yeah, Chip Kelly was hired to game plan. And Ryan Day is considered a great offensive mind and a great play caller, but with the complexity of the head coaching position being what it is now, the play calling and the offense has been ripped out of his hands, and he has reluctantly given it up. And they went full bore and they went all in to put the most money of any offensive coordinator role into Chip Kelly's hands to let Ryan Day be a head coach, in which, if this was a previous year, he might have been, I could give him an excuse, not rightfully so, but of thinking of his next series that he need to run plays with 45 seconds left on the clock, that his mind might have been elsewhere. And that's why he called back-to-back timeouts. But he supposedly is not calling the plays, although there is some conjecture there about him taking that back from Chip Kelly at some point in the game. It was just a mess, not playing to your own strengths. And yeah, like you say, it seems too stupid to believe that somebody would have to prove that they wouldn't be fine with just winning a game, 24-17 and throwing the ball 50 times and getting it done. And of course, you can't abandon the run completely, but they clearly needed to be throwing the ball 70% of the time in the second half. And I can't believe that he's that stupid to try to force this tough guy mentality. But we saw it. We watched it.
There's got to be some things. It's either that or Will Howard was more banged up by that Makari Page hit than we think. Perhaps maybe there's something there we don't know. But if you look at his behavior afterwards, right? And so this massive melee is happening and police are pepper spraying and members of the media are getting pepper sprayed, right? And you can see all kinds of Michigan and Ohio coaches in there trying to break it up. And you've got, student managers who are, 185 pounds trying to hold Jack Sawyer from going back in there for round 3. And you see these weird clips where in the midst of this, Ryan Day's just kind of just standing there watching it, like not involved. There's that one clip even where the guy walks by and he asks him what happened, and I'm just like that, I don't know, man. That's why I think you have to psychoanalyze this. I think we broke your coach. And I think that I've listened to several national shows since the game, and a lot of them keep saying the same thing. Ryan Day's miserable, needs to loosen up. And I think that they are acting as if that can happen in a vacuum. And I think you have to acknowledge, and maybe now that you're away from it, and I think you live in Florida now, right? So you're not around the Ohio bucknut culture. It doesn't work that way, right? Like here's the thing: if Jim Tressel says at a pep rally before a basketball game, and in such and such so many days you'll be proud of our kids in Ann Arbor, Michigan, goes up there and loses. The screws start tightening on him right away, just like they did to John Cooper, right? I mean, it's Urban Meyer who says this is not a passing game. It's Michigan-Ohio State's a line of scrimmage game. I'm not sure that you have a fan base that permits what people want Ryan Day to do, right? The fan base is way more obsessive about this game than we have ever been as a fan base on our end, like way more obsessive. And I mean, listening to the Michigan Reporter side of things, to hear them, a good buddy of mine, Isaiah Hull from USA Today Sports, was down there on the field. And he's texting me during the game, dude, the vibe here, the minute it looked like Michigan was going to do anything other than just ankle grab, the whole energy in the stadium, he texts me, is just like changing. And so I'm not sure that once you start in a hole with your fan base in this game, I don't think it's possible to dig out. You know what I'm saying? Because of the culture of your fan base. It's not a fan base. It's like, all right, guys, simmer down. He's 60-10. We'll get it back. Not like, dude, he's fired everywhere. I mean, people are looking at the buyout and everything else. There's once you start in a hole, first Ohio State losing 3 in a row to Michigan. Well, now it's 4 in a row. I think every other Ohio State coach that lost 3 in a row got fired. So I think with your own fan base, what Ryan Day probably needs to do at this point is probably not possible within your own ecosystem, right? It's like asking the rhinoceroses to fly. All right, they're rhinoceros, so they don't do that, And so if your own fan base is going to pucker and grip hard the first time Michigan shows it's going to be anything other than Susquehanna A&M for you guys to win 40-10, then I don't know if that's what your own fan base is like. And I know a little bit of something about this as a Detroit Lions fan. We have not had the historical success you guys have had, obviously. But, man, I mean, the first sign of negative – it took me 2 years of Dan Campbell's success before the first sign of negativity. I'm like, this is game's over. We're done, finished. Let's just stop watching, okay? And that's where your fan base is at right now. And I think he is, to quote Led Zeppelin, man, dazed and confused. And I don't know how he gets out of it. I thought one of your former players who made a mistake, I think, going to NBC, he's probably getting paid more, but at the Big Ten, they actually let him talk and analyze ball, and he was very good at it. Josh Perry. I can't remember. Josh Perry, thank you. I thought he made a fascinating point at a show I listened to this morning. He said, as a team, they came out and they put it on wax. We're going to beat Michigan, we're going to win the Big Ten, and we're going to win the Natty. Well, you lost to Michigan. You finished 4th in the Big Ten, okay? And now you're going to come back and say, let's go get them for the Natty, guys. That's kind of a tough rallying cry when you've already – I don't know how he digs out of this. That's what I'm long-windedly trying to say here. Given the ecosystem of obsession with your own fan base, before he even gets to Sharon Moore shooting arrows at him across the sidelines, he's getting arrows shot in his back from his own fan base, okay, during the game before it's even decided yet. So I don't know how you overcome it. I think as just an Ohio State coach, you got to have like instant success against Michigan or you're doomed. or you're doomed. Your fan base is not going to let you kind of figure it out.
Well, you include this in my entrance every week about being reasonable. So I'm going to do it here, even though a lot of Ohio State fans don't necessarily want to hear it this way. And I would have no issue if they fired Ryan Day as soon as the clock went to double zeros in whatever playoff game they lose. I would have no issue with that. I think it's justified. I also think it's justified to bring him back if they have success in the playoffs to whatever degree they believe success is, whether that's a Final Four appearance or needing to win a national championship, which, you know, the obsession, you just outlined it, that there are Ohio State fans that are saying, I don't care if we win the national championship, he still needs to go because you don't lose to Michigan and you don't lose 4 consecutive times as well. I also want to be reasonable in that you can imagine what's going through his mind after he just lost that game. Like, there is no recovery. What do you say? He's going to have no words for the media, and he's got to talk to the team, pull them together, and recover from this. And there's no way to make up for that result for another 365 days, regardless of what you do. It's impossible. So him walking off the field, and then, yeah, it's a bad look of him failing to be decisive in either way, whether he jumped in that melee or he turned around and said, go get him, boys, and walked away. He was just kind of standing there watching it like, what's going on? But at that moment, just minutes after he took another L, I can understand being a little shell-shocked and just having your head be somewhere else, not, oh, I didn't think I'd have to deal with this too. So I get that. The one thing, and yes, I made the same comment or a very similar comment on our Ohio State show to our 247 guys that we have on every week. I said, what is that stadium going to feel like if Michigan scores first, which of course didn't happen, but they took the 10-3 lead. What is that stadium going to feel like? Because I know what it feels like, or I've never been there for a Michigan game, but I know what the fan base, what the response is. I was just talking to an Iowa State guy about the Big 12 championship, and he brought up Ohio State, and he's like, that whole situation's insane. I can't imagine being somewhere where you can't lose a game. I'm so far removed from that. I don't know what it is. Ryan Day, I think he just says it automatically and doesn't even realize he's saying it. Almost every news conference at some point when there's something brought up, they could have just beaten Rutgers 52-3. If there is some line of questioning that's somewhat negative, he slips in this comment all the time. I understand I got to win every game. He says that all the time. So there's immense pressure on this guy. Now, the one thing I will say, and we're here 2 years later and 2 losses later, so maybe it doesn't apply now. But after they lost the 2022 game, and I thought they blew the playoff, but of course USC's loss let them in. My initial thought was, wow, I know they have the talent to compete with Georgia, but they are playing the worst possible team because we know that outfit is buttoned up and they're going to have their heads screwed on straight. And Kirby Smart, that whole deal, wow, they may get skull dragged across the field. They probably have no confidence, and they pulled it together and played a great game. Now, they don't have CJ Stroud's right arm this time around, and it is 2 more losses to Michigan and 2 more failed seasons going into a playoff game. So it remains to be seen whether he can pull together the squad again. I don't know, but it appears unlikely.
Before we go, let me throw some numbers at you that I referenced in the opening before you came on. This is the 5th straight time Michigan's played Ohio State when the Buckeyes are ranked number 2. Michigan's won the last 4. During that span, Ohio State has 1 Big Ten championship and no national championships to show for the fact it was the number 2 team in the country heading into the final weekend of the regular season. Michigan has not punted in the 4th quarter against Ohio State since 2019. Michigan had the ball for 13 of the 15 minutes in the 4th quarter on Saturday. Quarterback hits and pressures in the game on Saturday. Michigan 20, Ohio State 2. Now, some of that, the volume Lack of passing, obviously, but still, yowza. And a stat that I know you've heard a million times, but it still resonates. 23rd year in a row, the team that rushed the ball the most for the most yards ended up winning the game. So when you look at all of those things that I just mentioned, this is the first time Michigan has won back-to-back games in Columbus since it won 3 in a row from the time I was in middle school, Jimmy's senior year, to right before I graduated in 1990. So they won it in 86, 88, and 90. That's the last time Michigan's even won back-to-back games in Columbus. So we're back almost a half a century. So your thoughts when I relay all those numbers to you, what do they mean?
Well, it means that even though Michigan's not as good a football team as Ohio State, they're not. I don't think that's debatable. They certainly were the better team on Saturday. And more importantly, they were the tougher team physically and more so mentally, and the better prepared team and the team that was playing loose and confidently. And those are things that are difficult to, how many conversations have you and I had through everything that Michigan endured in losing to Ohio State, and then the 2020 season and Jim Harbaugh and all of that in terms of culture, psyche, trying to turn things around. Jim Harbaugh pulled it off. Mm-hmm. Although the obsession with this game is minuscule compared to what it is on the other side.
It is.
And so
we want to beat you guys very badly, but it's just not an obsession to us to the level that you guys have. It's just not. In fact, I don't even think that's possible for the Michigan fan base. It's just not wired that way. I just don't think it could happen.
And I think that there was just overwhelming support for your head coach, even though people weren't happy with 0-5. There were other reasons to like him, support him, back him, as opposed to Ryan Day, scads and scads of wins, and an 85% winning percentage doesn't mean anything if you don't win big games, and especially this game. I will say that this was not a decision that I made intellectually. This was a heart decision. So I don't know. I'm a visceral sports fan. Even though I'm a logical person, I like the teams I like because it just happened that way. I rooted for the Dallas Cowboys when I was 10 years old because I just felt like it. And so I know in 1985, 1995, pick the year, that being 7-5 and beating Michigan was so much more important and a more favorable place than to be 11-1 and playing in a Sugar Bowl, Rose Bowl, Orange Bowl for a national championship. However, I will say that after that game, I had to think I would rather be 10-2 and going to the college football playoff than being 7-5 right now and winning this game, because I think the game has been diminished to a certain extent. Now, I don't speak for Buckeye Nation, apparently, but I'm speaking for myself that I would rather have an elite team and program be playing for a college football playoff.
Final thing, you've got a new AD there, Russ Bjork, who, of course, came up with the Jimbo Fisher buyout at Texas A&M. This is approaching $40 million. It's reports I've seen anywhere from $37 to $39 million to move on from him. Do you believe if they don't win the Natty, that's what's going to happen here with him?
Yes.
You do?
The Natty, if they don't
so it's Natty or bust for Ryan Day is what I'm saying for you.
I don't know about that. I know that they need to win a couple games in the playoff. And the perspective is probably by many people, what's the difference? You lose the first playoff game or you lose the national championship game.
The thing Ohio State fans need to think about is look at what happened to Alabama last year when Nick Saban left. Okay? Because what you're thinking right now is you can't do it now because signing days this week and everything else. That's actually not what you have to worry about. What you got to worry about, because there's no more hold the coach through signing day and then the kids are stuck. That doesn't work that way anymore. So what you got to think about is if he gets to the middle of January and doesn't win the Natty and you fire him then, you're in the situation Alabama was in, where now you're the only team whose players are in the transfer portal and you lose 20 guys. And you can just see what that has done to Alabama's depth this year. You can just see. Okay. And because now Everybody's just going after your guys. The only guys that are any good in the portal are your guys, right? So it's not even just can you afford the buyout? Can you afford the buyout of how much more expensive it's going to get to retain your own roster and recruits when there's an exclusive 30-day window when they're the only players that the rest of college football can still instantly add to their roster. So there's the cost of that too. I mean, but on the other hand, this thing is so psychologically broken. I just, you may have no choice but to bite that bullet, man. There's really no good options here, frankly. I'll give you the last word, Mark.
And Ohio State fans also need to understand that I just believe that many of them think that it's an automatic going 11-1. You can hire a monkey and put him on the sideline and they're going to go 11-1. And that's been conditioned for a long time now, about 20 or 25 years, but that's not the case. So there's the potential of getting somebody in here, Kalen DeBoer, who's going to lose 3 or 4 games for a few years, maybe. And so this is not automatic. I think that Ohio State fans have been conditioned that 11-1's like the floor, and obviously they went 10-2 this year, and that the coach needs to supersede that and break through and win big games. That's his job, because you can't do worse than 11-1, 10-2 every year. Well, that's what it's been, but that's not guaranteed.
All right, great stuff, my friend. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
You bet. This week's X-Poll results, we asked Michigan fans, would you rather the 2024 Wolverines lose to Ohio State but win enough to make the playoffs without winning the Big Ten or Natty, or beat Ohio State but not win enough to make the playoffs? 88% said in that scenario, beat Ohio State. 12% said make the playoffs. Now, I voted for beat Ohio State. I think that might be Aaron's vote down there for make the playoffs. But, yeah, if we're not going to win a title, we're just going to make the playoff and play a couple of extra games, but lose the game, I'd rather win the game. Now, I will take winning titles over the game any day of the week, but if we're not winning titles, winning the game will do. That'll do. That brings us to our feedback of the week, and it's this photo from Matt Hayes, national college football writer. So for the Bucknuts here, because you know there's a ton of them, those are our specialists. Okay, those are our specialists, and they are as in the middle of the melee. We've got special teams guys doing the Ohio cheer back to the Buckeye fans who came back onto the field to start, the Bucknut players who came back onto the field to start a fight. So that Matt Hayes is correct. Best sport ever, indeed. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I'm sure you've got much to say in the comments, so you can like, rate, share, 5-star review. All of those things help us to grow the show. We would appreciate those of you that kept doing that. And thank you for those of you who already have, because you're a big reason why our show is well over 20,000 subscribers here on YouTube. So thank you for that. You can also follow us in between episodes on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Michigan Podcast, on X, at Michigan Podcast there. Until the next time, I'm Steve Deace. Forever, go Blue.